Potsdamer Platz, literally Potsdam Square, is an important public square and traffic intersection in the center of Berlin, Germany, lying about 1 kilometer south of the Brandenburg Gate and the Reichstag, and close to the southeast corner of the Tiergarten park. It is named after the city of Potsdam, some 25 kilometers to the southwest, and marks the point where the old road from Potsdam passed through the city wall of Berlin at the Potsdam Gate. After developing within the space of little over a century from an intersection of rural thoroughfares into the most bustling traffic intersection in Europe, it was totally laid waste during World War II and then left desolate during the Cold War era when the Berlin Wall bisected its former location. Since German reunification, Potsdamer Platz has been the site of major redevelopment projects. Historical background: Potsdamer Platz began as a trading post where several country roads converged just outside Berlin's old customs wall. The history of Potsdamer Platz can probably be traced back to the 29th of October 1685, when the Tolerance Edict of Potsdam was signed, whereby Frederick William, Elector of Brandenburg, Prussia from 1640 to 1688, allowed large numbers of religious refugees, including Jews from Austria and Huguenots expelled from France, to settle on his territory. A key motivation behind the edict was so the elector could encourage the rapid repopulation, restabilizing an economic recovery of his kingdom. Following the ravages of the 30 Years' War, altogether up to 15,000 Huguenots made new homes in the Brandenburg region, some 6,000 of these in its capital, Berlin. Two other things resulted from this huge influx. Firstly, Berlin's medieval fortifications, recently rebuilt from 1658 to 1674 in the form of a Dutch-style star fort, on an enormous scale and at great expense, became virtually redundant overnight, and secondly, the already crowded city became even more congested. Several new districts were founded around the city's perimeter, just outside the old fortifications. The largest of these was Friedrichstadt, just southwest of the historic core of Berlin. Begun in 1688 and named after new Elector Frederick William III, who later became King Frederick I of Prussia. Its street layout followed the Baroque-style grid pattern much favored at the time, and was based on two main axes, Friedrichstrasse running north-south, and Leipziger Strasse running east-west. All the new suburbs were absorbed into Berlin around 1709–10. In 1721–3 a southwestwards expansion of Friedrichstadt was planned under the orders of King Frederick William I, and this was completed in 1732–4 by architect Johann Philipp Gerlach. In this expansion, a new north-south axis emerged, Wilhelmstrasse. In 1735–7, after Friedrichstadt's expansion was complete, a customs or excise wall, 17 kilometers long and 4.2 meters high, was erected around Berlin's new perimeter, consisting of a wooden palisade at first. It was later replaced with a brick and stone wall, pierced by 14 gates where roads entered the city. Here taxes were levied on goods passing through, chiefly meat and flour. The most prestigious gate was the Brandenburg Gate, for the important road from Brandenburg. But 1 kilometer to the south was the entry point of another road that gained even greater significance. This road had started out in the Middle Ages as a lane running out from Berlin to the hamlet of Schöneberg, but it had developed into part of a trading route running right across Europe from Paris to St. Petersburg via Aachen, Berlin and Königsberg. In 1660 the Elector Frederick William made it his route of choice to Potsdam, the location of his palace, which had recently been renovated. Starting in 1754 a daily stagecoach ran between Berlin and Potsdam, although the road was in poor shape. But in 1740 Frederick II had become king, not a great lover of Berlin. He later built a new palace, the Sanssouci, at Potsdam in 1744–7, followed by the new palace in 1763–9. So the road now had to be made fit for a king, plus all his courtiers and staff. After numerous other improvements, in 1791–3 this section was made into Prussia's first all-weather road. It later became Potsdamer Strasse, its point of entry into Berlin, where it passed through the customs wall, became the Potsdamer Tor. Once inside the gate, Leipziger Strasse was its eastwards continuation, and Wilhelmstrasse was the first north-south thoroughfare that intersected with it. It was around this gate that Potsdamer Platz was to develop. As a physical entity, Potsdamer Platz began as a few country roads and rough tracks fanning out from the Potsdam Gate. According to one old guidebook, it was never a proper Platz, but a five-corner traffic knot on that old trading route across Europe. Just inside the gate was a large octagonal area, created at the time of Friedrichstadt's expansion in 1732–4 and bisected by Leipziger Strasse. This was one of several parade grounds for the thousands of soldiers garrisoned in Berlin at the height of the Kingdom of Prussia, initially known appropriately as the Actec. On the 15th of September 1814 it was renamed Leipziger Platz, after the site of Prussia's final decisive defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of Leipzig, 16–19 October 1813, which brought to an end the wars of liberation that had been going on since 1806. The Potsdam Gate itself was redesignated the Leipziger Tor around the same time, but reverted to its old name a few years later. The history of Leipziger Platz has been inextricably linked with that of its neighbor almost since its creation, yet the respective stories have in many ways been very different. The future Potsdamer Platz was most definitely outside Berlin, and therefore not subject to the planning guidelines and constraints that would normally be expected in a city keen to show itself off as the capital of an empire. It grew very rapidly in a piecemeal and haphazard way, and came to epitomize wildness and excess in a manner that contributed much to its legendary status. Leipziger Platz, however, was inside the city, and always had an orderly, disciplined look about it. After all, it had been planned and built all in one go by Johann Philipp Gerlach. One late 18th century artistic depiction shows a range of buildings relentless in the uniformity. Indeed, this, together with the grid pattern of the streets, is what one would expect in Prussia's chief garrison city. One writer of the time said that a stroll round Friedrichstadt was like walking round military barracks. In this respect, the Potsdam Gate was a dividing line between two different worlds. It was not until later on that many of these buildings began to be replaced by important historical palaces and aristocratic mansions. By this time, however, Leipziger Platz was no longer a parade ground, and there had been much speculation about a possible complete redesign for the whole area. Back in 1797 had come the first of two proposed schemes that would have afforded the future Potsdamer Platz the appearance of a proper square. Under both schemes, the old rural intersection just outside the Potsdam Gate and the octagon just inside were to be joined together to create a long rectangular space with a gargantuan edifice standing in the middle of it. The 1797 scheme came from the renowned Prussian architect Friedrich David Gilly, who proposed a monument to the former Prussian king, Friedrich II. Though containing some Egyptian and French neoclassicist features, the design was basically a huge Greek temple in the Doric style, loosely modelled on the Parthenon in Athens. They're raised up on an enormous geometric plinth and flanked by numerous obelisks. A grand new Potsdam Gate formed part of the design. It was never built, but 18 years later in 1815 Gillies' pupil, Carl Friedrich Schinkel, put forward plans for a national memorial cathedral to commemorate the recent victories in the Wars of Liberation, to be known as the Residenzkirche. It was again never built due to lack of funds, and in any case the national fervor of the period favored the long-awaited completion of Cologne Cathedral over a new building. But Schinkel went on to become one of the most prolific and celebrated architects of his time, so the layout stayed put, although in 1823-4 Schinkel did get to rebuild the Potsdam Gate, formerly little more than a gap in the customs wall. It was replaced by a much grander affair consisting of two matching Doric-style stone gate houses, like little temples, facing each other across Leipziger Strasse. The one on the north side served as the customs house and excise collection point, while its southern counterpart was a military guardhouse, set up to prevent desertions of Prussian soldiers, which had become a major problem. The new gate was officially dedicated on the 23rd of August 1824. The design also included a new look for Leipziger Platz, attempts to create a market that would draw off some of the frenetic commercial activity in the center of the city had not been successful, and so Schinkel proposed to turn it into a fine garden. Although this part of the design was not implemented, it was a rival plan by gardener and landscape architect Peter Joseph Lenne, drawn up in 1826, that went ahead in 1828 but with modifications. In later years Lenne would completely redesign the Tiergarten, a large wooded park formerly the Royal Hunting Grounds, also give his name to Lenne Strasse, a thoroughfare forming part of the southern boundary of the park, very close to Potsdamer Platz, and transform a muddy ditch to the south into one of Berlin's busiest waterways, the Landwehr Canal. Meanwhile, country peasantry were generally not welcome in the city, and so the gates also served to restrict access. However, the country folk were permitted to set up trading posts of their own just outside the gates, and the Potsdam Gate especially. It was hoped that this would encourage development of all the country lanes into proper roads. In turn, it was hoped that these would emulate Parisian boulevards, broad, straight and magnificent, but the main intention was to enable troops to be moved quickly. Thus Potsdamer Platz was often running. It was not called that until the 8th of July 1831, but the area outside the Potsdam Gate began to develop in the early 19th century as a district of quiet villas, for as Berlin became even more congested, many of its richer citizens moved outside the customs wall and built spacious new homes around the trading post, along the newly developing boulevards, and around the southern edge of the Tiergarten. Initially the development was fairly piecemeal, but in 1828 this area just to the west of Potsdamer Platz, sandwiched between the Tiergarten and the north bank of the future Landwehr Canal, received royal approval for a more orderly and purposeful metamorphosis into a residential colony of the affluent, and gradually filled with houses and villas of a particularly palatial nature. These became the homes of civil servants, officers, bankers, artists and politicians among others, and earned the area the nickname Millionaire's Quarter, although its official designation was Friedrichstadt, or alternatively the Tiergartenviertel. Many of the properties in the neighborhood were the work of architect Georg Friedrich Heinrich Hitzig, a pupil of Schinkel, who also built the original English embassy in Leipziger Platz, where the vast Wertheim department store would later stand. Although Friedrichstadt's focal point and most notable building was the work of another architect, and another pupil of Schinkel, the Matthias Gisch, built in 1844–6, was an Italian Romanesque-style building in alternating bands of red and yellow brick, and designed by Friedrich August Euler. This church, one of fewer than half a dozen surviving pre-World War II buildings in the entire area, forms the centerpiece of today's Culture Forum. Meanwhile, many of the Huguenots fleeing religious persecution in France, and their descendants, had also been living around the trading post and cultivating local fields. Noticing that traffic queues often built up at the Potsdam Gate due to delays in making the customs checks, these people had begun to offer coffee, bread, cakes and confectionery from the homes or from roadside stalls to travelers passing through, thus beginning the tradition of providing food and drink around the future Potsdamer Platz. In later years, larger and more purpose-built establishments had begun to take the place, which in turn were superseded by even bigger and grander ones. The former district of quiet villas was by now anything but quiet. Potsdamer Platz had taken on an existence all its own whose sheer pace of life rivaled anything within the city. By the mid-1860s, direct taxation had made the customs wall redundant, and so in 1866–7 most of it was demolished along with all the city gates except two, the Brandenburg Gate and the Potsdam Gate. The removal of the customs wall allowed its former route to be turned into yet another road running through Potsdamer Platz, thus increasing still further the amount of traffic passing through. This road, both north and south of the Platz, was named Königgrätzer Straße after the Prussian victory over Austria at the Battle of Königgrätz on 3 July 1866, in the Austro-Prussian War. The railways arrived. The railway first came to Berlin in 1838, with the opening of the Potsdamer Bahnhof, terminus of a 26 km line linking the city with Potsdam, opened throughout by the 29th of October. Since the city authorities would not allow the new line to breach the customs wall, still standing at the time, it had to stop just short at Potsdamer Platz, but it was this that kick-started the real transformation of the area into the bustling focal point that Potsdamer Platz would eventually become. Just 3 years later, a second railway terminus opened in the vicinity, located 600 meters to the southeast, with a front facade facing Askanische Platz. The Anhalter Bahnhof was the Berlin terminus of a line opened on 1 July 1841, as far as Jüterbog and later extended to Dessau, Cothen and beyond. Both termini began life as fairly modest affairs, but in order to cope with increasing demands both went on to much bigger and better things in later years. A new Potsdamer Bahnhof, destined to be Berlin's busiest station, opening on 30 August 1872, and a new Anhalter Bahnhof, destined to be the city's biggest and finest, following on 15 June 1880. This latter station benefited greatly from the closure of a short-lived third terminus in the area, the Dresdner Bahnhof, located south of the Landwehr Canal, which lasted from 17 June 1875 until 15 October 1882. In addition, a railway line once ran through Potsdamer Platz itself. This was a connecting line opened in October 1851 and running around the city just inside the customs wall, crossing numerous streets and squares at street level, and whose purpose was to allow goods to be transported between the various Berlin stations, thus creating a hated traffic obstruction that lasted for 20 years, half a dozen or more times a day. Potsdamer Platz ground to a halt while a train of 60 to 100 wagons trundled through at walking pace, preceded by a railway official ringing a bell. The construction of the ring barn around the city's perimeter, linked to all the major stations, allowed the connecting line to be scrapped in 1871. Although the ring barn itself was not complete and open for all traffic until the 15th of November 1877. In later years, Potsdamer Platz was served by both of Berlin's two local rail systems. The U-Bahn arrived first, from the south, began on the 10th of September 1896. It opened on the 18th of February 1902, with a new and better sited station being provided on the 29th of September 1907, and the line itself being extended north and east on the 1st of October 1908. In 1939 the S-Bahn followed, its north-south link between Unter den Linden and Yorkstrasse opening in stages during the year. The Potsdamer Platz S-Bahn station itself opening on the 15th of April. By the second half of the 19th century, Berlin had been growing at a tremendous rate for some time, but its growth accelerated even faster after the city became the capital of the new German Empire on the 18th of January 1871. Potsdamer Platz and neighboring Leipziger Platz really started coming into their own from this time on, now firmly in the center of a metropolis whose population eventually reached 4.4 million, making it the third largest city in the world after London and New York. The area was ready to take on its most celebrated role. Vast hotels and department stores, hundreds of smaller shops, theaters, dance halls, cafes, restaurants, bars, beer palaces, wine houses and clubs, all started to appear. Some of these places became internationally known. Also, a very large government presence, with many German imperial departments, Prussian state authorities and the various sub-departments, came into the area, taking over 26 former palaces and aristocratic mansions in Leipziger Platz, Leipziger Strasse and Wilhelmstrasse. Even the Reichstag itself, the German parliament, occupied the former home of the family of composer Felix Mendelssohn in Leipziger Strasse before moving in 1894 to the vast new edifice near the Brandenburg Gate, erected by Paul Wallot. Next door, the Herrenhaus, or Prussian House of Lords, occupied a former porcelain factory for a while, before moving to an impressive new building erected on the site of the former Mendelssohn family home in 1899 to 1904 by Friedrich Schulze Kolditz. This building backed onto an equally had edifice in the next street, also by Kolditz, that had been built for the Preußische Landtag in 1892-9. Potsdamer Platz was also the location of Germany's first electric streetlights, installed in 1882 by the electrical giant Siemens, founded and based in the city.